Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie Hynam, and I support the UK IMEA Connect Women Network. We're delighted that you could all join us today for the final event to celebrate International Women's Day. International Women's Day is a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. The theme for this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge, because a challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes change. So let's all #choose to challenge. I'm very pleased that this afternoon we have Olivia Finch joining us. Olivia is a portfolio manager within the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Insights and Analysis team, responsible for the overall strategy and management of a portfolio of philanthropically funded research projects. Olivia leads the Foundation's work on the built environment, working with the Foundation's partners and network to help accelerate implementation of circular economy across real estate, buildings, and the construction sector. Leading the conversation today is Eva Hinkers. Eva is the chair of Arab's Europe region, and as recently announced, will be joining the group board in April. Eva is an experienced project director, and she is strongly committed to the idea of total design, resulting in better buildings that use less resources. Eva has led the Europe Sustainable Development Team and is the partnership director for Arab's ongoing relationship with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, leading our work to create catalysts for change in the application of circular economy principles in the built environment. And now I'd like to hand over to Eva and Olivia.
So hello everyone, thanks for joining, and hi Libby, it's so lovely to have you. When we talked earlier, we just said that Libby and I, we met at the outset of the pandemic, so we only met online so far, and we do hope that, in the not too far future, we will have a chance to meet in person as well. So welcome, Libby. Libby, by means of introduction, can you tell us a bit about the circular economy, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and your role? So a big question.
Brilliant. Thanks, Eva, and thank you very much for having me on this. It's it's a real honour to be part of this event. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it was founded in 2010, and I joined the foundation just over 3 years ago, in 2017. And the mission of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy, which is sort of simple to say, but a lot harder to do in practice. So for those that perhaps have less understanding of what circular economy is, we always say the best way to understand the circular economy is actually to look at the economy we have today. And currently, our predominant economic model is inherently extractive and consumptive. So we take raw materials out of the ground, we make things with those materials, we use them often only once, and then we throw them away, and we throw them away mostly into landfill. So this is what we call a linear economy. It's a take, make, waste system, and it's really dominated today's economy since really the Industrial Revolution, which gave us the ability to make more and more stuff faster and faster and cheaper than ever before. And it's fair to say that that system has brought fantastic prosperity and development to millions. But clearly, this linear way of doing things has its limits on two major fronts, really. First of all, it really doesn't make very effective use of our resources. And we know that those resources, those raw materials, they're not infinite at all. They're finite, and they will run out eventually. And secondly, it creates huge amounts of waste and pollution, which we see, across the world, and that contributes to the degradation of the environment and the global challenges that we know and that we're facing at the moment, such as climate change and biodiversity. So really, if we want to continue to build prosperity for all, this system needs to completely change. The whole system needs to change, and that's where the circular economy comes in. So in contrast to the linear economy, a circular economy aims to be restorative and regenerative by design, and importantly it's a framework for system level change, and it's based on three principles, and these three principles govern everything that we do really at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So I'll just go through them quickly. The first one is to design out waste and pollution. So rather than treating the symptoms of pollution and waste once it's generated, you design products and services in the first place so that waste or pollution aren't created. The second principle is to keep products and materials in use. So instead of using something once and then throwing it away, this is about introducing activities that allow materials to be used again and preserving them at their highest value for as long as possible. And examples of that include designing for durability, reuse, repair and remanufacturing models, and then sort of the last resort would be recycling. And then third and final principle, which is really a big one, is to regenerate natural systems. So if we look at nature around us, there's no such thing as waste, really. Everything ends up in one big nutrient loop. And it's only humans that have introduced this concept of waste. So this third principle is about, instead of trying to do less harm, we want to try and improve and enhance our natural systems by returning valuable nutrients to the soil. So an example would be regenerative agricultural practices, instead of using pesticides and chemical fertilizers that degrade soil health, or using renewable and biological materials instead of ones that are derived from petrochemicals. So I'm going to stop there. It's a whistle-stop tour of circular economy, and then clearly there's loads more to say about it, and there's lots of resources available on our website for those that are more interested.
Yeah, and I think you've already illustrated in your answer there that it's not just about material flows. I mean, that's at the core of it. But by means of that, it really responds to climate change, doesn't it? So. Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's a really good point. I think things are getting better on that front, but in the beginning, the work of the foundation really had to work quite hard to overcome the assumption that a circular economy was just about waste management and recycling, and it's so much bigger than that. So we work really hard to promote the circular economy as a system solution framework. As I said, this idea that it's about tackling the whole system, and tackling global challenges like climate change and biodiversity loss is definitely a part of that. And if you look at the three principles that I talked about, they really, like, if you drill them down, they go right into the heart of how we produce and consume things. How do we make and use products and services? And that's super important in the context of climate change, because to date, a lot of the efforts to reduce carbon emissions have focused on the adoption of renewable energy and energy efficiency measures, which obviously we know is massively important, but it's only going to go so far, because it won't tackle the harder to abate emissions that result from industry. So how we manufacture products, and also food and land use, which is a massive contribution to greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. The foundation produced a report in 2019 which showed that up to 45% of greenhouse gas emissions are associated with land management and the production of consumer goods, buildings and other products. And even if current renewable energy and energy efficiency policies are optimized, across the world, they would only offset up to 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So the other 45% is really where circular economy can come in and help introduce material efficiency measures and circular business solutions, which really help to improve and abate the carbon emissions associated with manufacturing. And key commodities like steel and cement and and how we use our land, deforestation, agricultural practices. There's all sorts of circular approaches that we can apply to really tackle those carbon emissions.
Yeah, and you just illustrated how closely and intrinsically consumption in the widest sense and climate change are interlinked. Yeah, and you just mentioned. Sorry.
So yeah, built environment. I was going to say, like, the built environment is a really good example of that. You know, the amount of embodied carbon emissions associated with the construction and use of buildings and our built environment, it's huge, and we can apply renewable energy to the energy that those buildings use, but the embodied carbon associated with their construction won't be abated by that. So we really do need to focus on the other half of the picture there.
Yeah, and our engagement is currently focusing on real estate. So, but you've engaged in this relationship between Arup and EMF longer than I have. I only joined last year. You've been working on it for 3 or 4 years, Olivia, I believe. So, can you talk a bit about how we have engaged and what you think we've achieved?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So when I joined the foundation, I immediately started working with your colleagues in Arup, and that was just over 3.5 years ago now. But Arup has been a really important partner of the foundation since 2016. I believe providing expert knowledge and expertise on built environment and real estate and how we can apply circular economy in those sectors. So yeah, the partnership touched on loads of different aspects of circular economy and the built environment, and like all over the world. We've looked at we did a project looking at cities in China. We've looked at business models, circular business models in Europe, and there's been circular economy demonstrators in the United States. So really global approach, which is fantastic. But probably the most important collaboration, which is one I've worked most closely on, is the principles to practices work, and that really looked at the ways, how can we apply the principles of circular economy in practice in the built environment. So there was we did a lot of stakeholder engagement, and there was across the built environment sector, and there was a feeling that whilst the principles of circular economy are understood and intuitively make sense, it's a lot harder to see how those can be applied in the day-to-day roles of built environment professionals, and what they actually need to do to make changes, and how they're currently doing things that will take them towards a more circular built environment. So we produced 2 reports as part of that project. The first was setting out that initial research about what the current barriers and opportunities and enablers for a circular economy are, and that's called First Steps to a Circular Built Environment. And then the second report is called Realising the Value of Circular Economy in Real Estate. And this one was I think really important, and kind of has set up the rest of the work that we've set out now with our collaboration, because it looks at the business case for circular economy, and for the first time we were able to provide quantifiable evidence that applying circular economy and circular business models to the way we construct and use real estate buildings results in improved financial performance. And that's really crucial, because we know we need to get the first movers, the real estate investors and the construction clients convinced that this is not only the right thing to do, but also that there's a business case for it in order to start moving towards circular economy. So yeah, really good to be working on these kind of things.
Yeah, and for those who are interested, the paper you just talked about, this thought leadership piece, principles to practices for all Europeans, is on SharePoint. So just look out for it. So if you look at Arup as a firm, you know us a little bit now, quite well actually. What do you think we need to challenge ourselves with to achieve a circular economy for Arup?
Do you mean for within the organisation, or for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, the organisation.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think it comes down to just working to see across everything that you're doing within Arup to think about how circular economy can be implemented. And what's really great about working with Arup from the foundation's point of view is that we can produce the research and the evidence and promote the reasons why implementing circular economy is a good idea, and we think that we do that quite well, but we can't actually do it, and that's why we form these partnerships. It's super important to us that we work with the people that are able to make these changes across many sectors, and that for us, the partnership with Arup really represents that ability to start kind of scaling circular economy activity. Particularly in the building and construction sector, which we know is currently hugely wasteful and carbon intensive. So I think everyone within Arup, across all of the fantastic and varied work that you do, can just find ways to think about how they're designing and how they can apply circular principles into their projects and just contribute to trying to really scale and increase the number of tangible examples of circular economy there are out there working in practice.
Yeah, and beyond that, it's really exciting, I think, Libby, the kind of collaboration we do with the EU, the working group that you've been supporting for circular economy for infrastructure. And then now we've just been approached and we're working together with the G20 on circular economy for infrastructure again. So really exciting, because that is really, a way to influence at a big scale. But then if we zoom in, there's those are the big things. But what do you think we as individuals can do?
I mean, this one, this one is, I think harder. We at the foundation, we always say that actually it's about changing the system, and we don't think it's really fair to put the onus on consumers on the individual level. If the system was working correctly, everyone is making the right choice anyway, just because that's what's available to them. So that's why we have this approach of really, an industry-led approach, and working with businesses and governments and academia to try and create this system-level change, rather than targeting the public and consumers, who can only do so much really from their position. But I would say, the number one thing is to educate yourself, and it's true of anything. It's true of questions around gender and race and what environmental inequalities, like what are the things that are important. Go out there, educate yourself. There's so many resources on our website about circular economy, and the tools and the resources are available there for you to think about how you can apply it in your work and your daily life. So that for me would be the number one thing, and then that fits into the overall system that we're trying to create.
Yeah, I like that answer, Livy. That's it's an interesting way and a good way of looking at it. It's a systemic problem; it can't be solved by the individual. Yeah.
Yeah.
But back to the individual now. You told us about your work and what you do in the foundation and how we have collaborated. But we're really curious to hear a bit about you as a person. So, what's your, what was your career path? How did you get to where you are now?
Well, yeah, I guess I've always been interested in the environment and how humans affect the environment. I did geography at university, and then I did a master's in environmental management. And then from there, I actually went into environmental consultancy. So my first job was working for an environmental planning consultancy, and that's where I learned about the sort of the building and the planning sector and how development projects come together. And I was doing environmental impact assessments and sustainability assessments and BREEAM and all of that for a number of years. So that gave me, a pretty good foundational knowledge in assessing environmental impacts, and also the sort of the building and construction sector. And from there, I moved more into corporate social responsibility, I guess. So kind of away from the planning sector, and more into business strategy world. Still in consultancy though. And yeah, so that was sort of assessing key sustainability strategies and what was materially important to different companies in terms of their how they were applying sustainability, which was really interesting. And then I think I sort of discovered circular economy, and it just it really resonated with me, and that's when I sort of took a bit of time out, and then that's when I applied for a job at the foundation, and the rest is history. So it's kind of always been an environmental sustainability career for me, with slightly sort of different angles around that. But I sort of decided that I wanted to move away from consultancy, and the foundation was just a really good fit for me.
Great. And as we heard earlier from Kate, the theme of this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. And, you've committed to nothing less but change the economy, which is, it's a major undertaking, and you don't see success overnight. You're running a marathon. So where do you take that motivation day on day? And I'm sure there are setbacks as well, and your frustrations. So you always need to motivate yourself. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think I did have this sort of slight moment when I was working at the last consultancy I worked at in London, and I'd already done a lot of reading around circular economy, and I really sort of saw the potential of it, and I went to my boss at the time and I said, the circular economy I think it's going to be big. I think we need to put, have a proposition around this. And he said, oh well, it's just another word for recycling, isn't it? And I think that was the moment really where I sort of went, actually, like I want to be in that space. I want to be in that kind of that innovation space where people are really taking risks, I guess, to try and push a different way of doing things forward. So for the first time really, I walked out of a job and I didn't have another job to go to, and that was probably quite for me it was a big risk to take, but I'm really pleased I did, because it kind of it really motivated me. That moment really motivated me to go, well, what do I actually want to do? And for me, it was about this, this positive solutions framework, something that you could see was geared towards changing for the better rather than just trying to do less harm, which is something that we find separates circular economy from kind of more traditional sustainability messages. And I can't talk about what motivates me without talking about Ellen MacArthur herself, because I think her story is just so inspiring. And there's plenty of people now. It's so interesting. Plenty of people now come to the foundation and they have no idea what Ellen's background was. But for those that don't know, she was the first woman to sail solo around the world. She was the youngest person to sail solo around the world, and not only was she the first woman, but she was also the fastest person, man or woman, to sail solo around the world. And she did this in 2004 at the age of 24. So massively inspiring story in itself. But while she was on that journey, while she was sailing around the world, she became very obsessed with the concept of what was finite, because what she had on the boat was all she had. And so if she used something up, there was no way of getting no way of getting it back, and everything was planned to the nth degree in terms of like down to the ground what she could have on the boat, because weight was so important for her to go fast. And so this idea that what you have is all you have really kind of occupied her for the whole time she was doing this. And she says that when she stepped off the boat, she sort of had this moment of realization that the world is really no different, and that we're using things up and no one really has a plan for what to do when it runs out. This was just something that kind of took hold of her, and she just couldn't let it go. And I think it's just so amazing that someone who is at the height of their career, you know, now a kind of renowned sailing professional, sort of walked away from all of that to go and explore this, and she just couldn't understand why there wasn't a plan. And so she went on this kind of journey of discovery, and ended up with a load of different academics and scientists and engineers, and gradually this school of thought around circular economy started unfolding, and she decided that it was too important to not do something around it. And for me, like that's just incredible. So if I'm ever feeling a little demotivated, Ellen's story is a very easy one to get me inspired again, and get me going again.
Yeah, that resonates very well with me. I remember when Ellen came to our AGAM, that's our Global Directors meeting in 2015, and gave her keynote. And for me, it was like, a crack had opened up, and I saw something. I was beginning to see something that was really big, and it has stayed with me since, and I educated myself around it. So yeah, she inspired me too in a big way. It shows how role models and inspiring people, what influence and impact they have. That's
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And anyone that hasn't watched her. If you're interested, like watch her TED talk. I think it's called the interesting thing I learned while sailing around the world, and it really explains that journey she went on from sailing to setting up the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. For me, it's just really inspiring. So do check that out.
Yeah. Staying with strong women, when in our preparation, we also talked about the fact that it is interesting that environmental issues, mitigating climate change, that this is obviously something that resonates strongly with women, and that we see a lot of strong women around us really dedicating their energy to it. I see that in Arab too, and whereas we might be underrepresented in some areas, you can't say that, around sustainable development. Do you see that too in other organizations, and do you have a theory why that may be?
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it's certainly true within the foundation. I think we're currently 70% women, 30% men in the foundation. And we do, in the work that we do, convening and the network that we have, we do. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there is definitely parity in terms of men and women representation, if not slightly women in the majority. And so yeah, I've read quite a bit around this, and there's research that states that women tend towards these roles because of kind of just inherent personality differences. So women tend to display a strong ethic of care and be more empathetic than men, which leads to them caring about environmental problems, and that's kind of one school of thought about why this could be. But I actually think there's a real danger in assuming this is just the way things are. And I've also seen some research that talks about this widening, what they call an eco-gender gap, that because women are seen as more caring, like eco and green products are almost singularly marketed towards women. So if you actually look in the supermarkets now, like all of the kind of eco products have a very sort of definite female target audience, and that results in kind of men viewing green and as feminine, and then sometimes the argument is that sometimes then they're less inclined to participate for fear that they'll be perceived as weak or less masculine, which is kind of completely ridiculous, really, if you think about it. But there is this research coming out that's showing that. And I think really that speaks to the heart of gender disparities in our society today, doesn't it? You know, eco products tend to be associated with household tasks that the bulk of women are still responsible for. So unless we close the gap around who's the primary care of the household and who looks after the children, then we're not going to close that eco-gender gap. And it's the same when it comes to action around climate change as well. Like men are more likely to be convinced on the basis of science and technology and business arguments, whereas women tend to argue on the basis of kind of environmental ethics and justice. And men typically view those kind of traits as feminine and less rational. But it comes down to the fact that men trust the institutions that have historically always served them well, and they trust that those institutions will sort out the kind of these problems that are happening for them, whereas women who have historically been excluded from those institutions are less inclined to trust, and therefore more likely to seek out the opportunities to advocate for change and to, try and seek, I guess, environmental justice. So it's super interesting. Clearly huge generalizations in some of those examples, and there are plenty of exceptions. And I'm certainly not for a second saying that men don't care about the environment, but I think there's an interesting trend there, and it's good to reflect on it.
Yeah, which is also a risk that we need to keep an eye on, because it needs to be inclusive, and like in everything, EDI is just absolutely key. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, completely. And that's a responsibility for businesses as well, to make sure that they're aware of that, and then they're not marketing products in a way that is feminine, and that it's seen as something that is obviously completely applicable to both genders.
Yeah, I fully agree, Libby. So now, outlook into the future. What are your next goals?
Yeah, these questions always scare me slightly. Kind of goals. Yeah, I mean, for the foundation, certainly our goal is to sort of really focus now on scaling and mainstreaming the application of circular economy. So we've spent, I think it's probably fair to say, we spent the last 10 years kind of developing and promoting the idea. So making sure that it's well understood, that there's very consistent framing around what circular economy means and how it can be applied. And now it's about getting it, starting to demonstrate in an action and really mobilizing those system solutions at scale. And we do that across a number of key sectors. And a large part of that is going to be, focus on demonstrating the potential of circular economy to deliver on climate and biodiversity goals. So this is a big priority for us. And it's really, as you said, it's super relevant to our work with Arup, how circular economy can help buildings and construction industry to move towards net zero is a really exciting area for us. Yeah. So, I'm looking forward to that.
And the time is right, it's really time to move from awareness to action. And we do see the industry moving in a big way. It's really encouraging. So to see that bearing fruit very quickly, very soon.
Let's hope. Yeah.
But where do you see the biggest challenges? I mean, also from your experience in other markets, where do you think are the big roadblocks in achieving that?
I think for us, it's always the first challenge is always getting people to think in terms of applying upstream design solutions rather than trying to mitigate and address kind of the symptoms at the end. So this idea that we really need to focus on design solutions in order to get to the root cause of the problems that we see. So I think that for us is like always the key kind of hurdle that we have to overcome, is that ability to just like shift your entire thinking to the start of the process. And then I think, yeah, for our work with Arup, the main challenge is you know, the need to really ensure full collaboration across the whole value chain. So particularly we see, you know, how we're trying to work very hard on how to create demand in the real estate value chain for implementing circular approaches. So we often see that manufacturers and suppliers are bringing circular products and services to the market, but unless the demand side is in place, so unless sort of real estate investors and construction clients themselves and the developers are asking for it and demanding that, we won't be able to scale at the rate we need to. So that idea of you know, not working in silos and really trying to get full collaboration participation in the circular economy across the whole value chain is super important.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, absolutely. And the other element that we need are policies, because without that, I don't think we will get there. But what is really encouraging to see that first steps are being made, and we talked about that in one of our catch-ups we had a few weeks ago, how in the EU there be policies being put in place that are now followed by legislation. And as a first instance, this is about financial products, but that will have a huge impact. And we see clients coming to us already saying, how do I respond to this? How do I measure circularity of my buildings? And we're very close to developing this design tool together that we want to roll out pre-COP26 and launch in the market, which will do exactly that. It will help our clients to measure the circularity of their buildings and respond to these legislations and policies. I think that would be a big market changer. It will be a big changer.
Yeah, that's a really good example of that. You know, that you need all of the parts of the system kind of coming together. So you've got the policy incentives, then you've got the design solution coming forward there with the toolkit, and then you've got the industry actually committing and wanting to work towards that and applying those solutions, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, and we're beginning to see all this coming together, which is great, and that's hugely motivating, isn't it, Libby? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So on that, shall we open it up for the Q&A?
Lovely. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Okay. 21 questions already. Okay, begin. So, just a moment. I don't see any. There we go. See if I take one here with quite a number of likes. Are changes to legislation, regulations, design codes, etc. fundamental to drive the implementation of the principles to practice in the built environment? And if so, are we making progress? I think we just answered that, didn't we, Libby? Do you want to add it?
Yeah, but it's a really good question, and it's something that that first half of our Principles to Practice project we looked into, and we spoke to policymakers as well as other actors, key stakeholders in the system. And interestingly, the policymakers kind of, I guess, the summary of what they said was, we can't make policy unless we know that the industry are ready to accept it, and that the demand is there, I guess, from the industry. So unless we see that the industry is ready to put circular economy into practice, we're not going to make policy around it. So it kind of reinforced that idea about you need to have commercial examples of it working before the policymakers are going to act. They're not going to force industry to do something that they're not ready to do. I mean, there's obviously a bit of a balance to be struck there to get the laggards to come up. So the front runners are the ones that need to show. But that was really interesting for us. So it did, we definitely see that policy is a key enabler for circular economy. But on its own, it wouldn't do it.
Right. Here's a question, Libby, beyond buildings. Can a circular economy be achieved in a rapidly developing city of low socio-economic status, where there is a less conventional built environment, for example, informal settlements? Good question.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work in different cities all over the world, and in particular, we have a team in South America, in Brazil, who are looking at this. And I think the issues around social justice are super important. So ensuring that circular economy builds prosperity for all is very key in those developing cities. The answer is yes. We absolutely believe it can. There's no one size fits all for a circular economy, and every application and every approach has to be designed right for the context that it's being applied to, clearly. So we'd never, and we've seen this in conversations with African cities as well. They already have an informal sector applying the principles of circular economy. So the informal sector of waste management in developing cities is really actually very sophisticated, and the way that they repair and remanufacture goods and products is way more sophisticated than it is in developed cities. But what we need to do is to recognise those skills are there, and we need to be able to enhance them with applying, the right safe and environmentally responsible practices with them. So unfortunately, a lot of the informal sector isn't well governed in terms of pollution and health and safety standards. And that obviously, for a circular economy to work, we need to make sure that it also is done in a equitable and safe way. So yeah, lots of interesting case studies on our circular economy and cities resource suite on the website about different developing cities.
Great, thanks, Libby. There's one question here about education. So how do you best inspire the next generation of circular economy practitioners? This person here has seen some cool articles by National Geographic, but really this needs to be embedded into education at all levels. How can we support this?
Yeah, really great question, and something that we've always recognised as well, that you need to the next generation of workers and professionals need to have the skills and the knowledge to be able to put circular economy into practice. So we do work with schools and colleges and universities. We have a strong network of higher education bodies that we work with to try and get circular economy into the syllabus. We work with the International Baccalaureate. They have circular economy in their syllabus, and on top of that, we have we do a lot of work with our partners in terms of professional learning. So there's a weekly circular economy show that really delves into different topics around circular economy that is open and accessible to everyone. And we also have specific professional learning training courses. So we are trying to make sure that learning is embedded so that people have the skills to be able to apply circular economy when they get into the workforce. But yeah, it's crucial, and there's a long way to go in terms of the educational system.
Yeah. But people do ask themselves what they can do as individuals. And you said earlier that, you know, it's what's really required is a system change. But there are questions here around, but until we see that change, what can we do as an individual? Do you have any quick wins or anything? I'm very sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, it's a fair point. I think probably the number one for me would be just really thinking about what you do with your waste. I think it can be quite easy to sort of throw away. Food waste in particular is one for me that since I joined the foundation, I'm just so much more aware of what I'm doing with my food. And, you know, like a really stupid but simple example is if you're chopping up a broccoli, you know, what do you do with the stalk? Like that's actually like delicious and you can roast that as part of your meal, whereas most people just chop it off and throw it in the bin or put it in their food waste. So I think just having sort of increasing your awareness around what you do with your waste, because there's no such thing as a way, and when you throw it away it goes somewhere and it either goes to landfill or hopefully it goes through a recycling system, or the food waste gets composted. But if you have the personal ability to change any of those routes for the better, then that would be my quick win, I think.
I think food is a really good example there from what an individual can do. There's another question here which I think is really interesting around COVID-19 has had a high impact on the high street. Is this a risk or an opportunity for circular economy in the built environment?
Really good question. Yeah, I think some of the work we did, you know, on the Principles to Practice project well before the pandemic, looked at utilization rates of buildings, which have always been, you know, much lower than they should be. So I think in Europe, the statistics is 30 to 40% of office space is unused. And that just basically means that you have materials and services that just you're not maximizing the utilization of them, which means that they're inefficient. I think the response to that in our paper, the circular economy response, is that you can apply circular business models that allow you to utilize the space in different ways. So if you design your space to be more flexible and adaptable, then you are able to bring in different users to make sure that space is being well used. So for instance, having a multi-tenanted approach to a building, that a traditional office building means outside of office hours, you could use that space for evening classes, or if there's a portion of the building that isn't being reused, can you sublet it for retail uses? And that, I think for me, that's going to become quite important as we sort of look at the world post-COVID. And I think a lot of office spaces aren't going to be going back to their traditional uses. But the worst thing we could do clearly is knock those buildings down and start again. We need to think of creative ways to use those spaces and renovate them and redesign them to meet current user needs. So for me, that's crucial, and I know the EU Renovation Wave project is really looking at that as well. So hopefully we don't sort of see a massive loss of really high value materials through demolition post COVID, and we find creative ways to keep those spaces useful.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that COVID has done is there's a lot of money now going into greening the economy, and because in the EU that will need to be under the taxonomy objectives, and one of the objectives is circular economy. So, in that way, COVID will accelerate the circular economy agenda, which is fantastic. So there's a question here about case studies where circular economy has been successfully implemented in real estate. well, maybe I give it a start.
Yeah.
So I think the first example that I was concerned with was in 2015, which was just showcasing what circular economy in the built environment for a building means. And it was a pavilion for the London Design Week, which was completely made of borrowed material and then taken apart again and sent back to the owners. So, you know, it was removed and completely gone, and all the material was reused then for other purposes. Then in 2017, at a much bigger scale, there was the design pavilion in Eindhoven, which was around the design week in the Netherlands, where a much builder building again was built from used material in a way, and we did the structural design for that in a way that didn't damage the material in any way. So it was, you know, it was taken apart and again given back at the end of the day. And these are, of course, pilot projects that, and I don't think that we could say that buildings as a whole have been designed in that way, but a lot of aspects of buildings, you know, the use of timber, for example, facades as a service rather than a product. And I think these are all really good examples. Modular buildings where that can be taken apart. So designed to deconstruct, as you mentioned earlier, Libby, as one of the principles, has been implemented in many projects and needs to be the norm. So we really need to, it absolutely needs to be the norm. And I think that's arriving in people's head, in clients' head. But I would say that truly circular buildings, there are very few, but there are some. But there are a lot of buildings now that have applied some of the circular principles. So we're still on a journey, it's probably fair to say.
I think so, and I think that's a really important point, Eva, is that you know, we're not saying that this is going to happen overnight. It's not that you can go from, you know, completely linear to circular straight away. It's about assessing the range of circular approaches and circular principles that are available to you, and working out which you can apply to begin with and which you can then look at for the future. And for me, that's why we call it a transition to a circular economy. You know, it is going to be a transition, and it would be completely unrealistic to think that we can change the global economy in one go. So that the idea about being able to apply certain circular approaches and then working through a strategy to be able to apply more and more is really important. So don't be discouraged by the thought that, you know, there's no true circular building out there. Like, that will happen. It's just fantastic that we see more and more examples of different types of circular principles being applied. And the more that happens, the more it will scale, and the more it will become the norm.
Yeah, and what you just said there, Libby, how important it is to explore what principles may be applied for this particular project, that very project you're working on with a client. This exploration phase at the beginning is really, really important. And that's what the design tool is also meant to help with and guide you through, to explore that with your client and identify, you know, what that very project might benefit from and where you want to put a focus or can put a focus. And that's really, really important, because that's where it really happens, isn't it? In the early phase of a project, that's where you have the huge impact. Yeah,
absolutely. And that will be complemented by the investment case that we're working on, which will show, you know, basically the different costs and the different payback periods associated with different types of you know, circular principles that you can, and circular business models that you can apply. So those two things, again, they need to come together in that decision making process. And if you don't have that information, then it's a lot harder to sort of apply them and take the plunge. So that's really what we're working on together.
Yeah, and we weren't even able to touch on all the business cases here today. But then again, you know, all these layers in a building with different lifespans, they all have different business models again. You know, so it's quite complex, but there will be tools and frameworks to guide us through that and help clients to understand what the best solution is for their project and help and enable us to lead them through that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Libby. I think we're coming to an end. Thanks so much. It was hugely interesting.
Thank you. No, I really enjoyed it, and it's it's great to be a part of this. Thank you.
So, Kate, are you going to say the final words?
I just want to thank you both for joining us today. That was really brilliant, inspirational, and it's filled me with a lot of hope, which sometimes it's been lacking throughout the COVID lockdown. So thank you very much. I also want to thank Warren Russell for doing the behind the scenes, and thank everyone for attending. And if people would like to get involved with Connect Women UK INEA, please contact your local representative. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, everyone.